All right, in the trial of People versus Erik Menendez, he is in court with his attorneys. People are represented, and we have our jury as well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Glad to see you all back, and welcome. And we are in the process today of hearing opening statements. In this case, you will hear the opening statement in regards to the defendant that you will be dealing with. That's the defendant, Erik Menendez. Other people at counsel table that you have not been introduced to and have not seen in these proceedings before, I'll introduce you to them now. First of all, the co-defendant is at counsel table, and that's Joseph Lyle Menendez. And his attorneys as well are present. That's Ms. Jill Lansing and Mr. Michael Burt. Right, and also Detective Zoller from the Beverly Hills Police Department is present. And as I indicated to you when we were involved in jury selection, you are the jury that will decide the case of Erik Menendez. And this morning we've already heard the opening statement in regards to the co-defendant. Since it related only to the co-defendant, there was no need for you to be present, and that's why we had you wait upstairs. I'll make some remarks to you this morning, and because it's almost noon, we'll have to take the break until after lunch to give everybody a chance to catch a bite to eat before we actually start the opening statements in regards to the defendant, Erik Menendez. But let me make a few remarks to you. First of all, as you're all aware, when you were last here, we gave you those little blue dots to put on your badges, and you have them. That designates you as the jury for the defendant, Erik Menendez. The other jury involved with the co-defendant, Lyle Menendez, have gold dots on their badges, and that assists us in identifying them, and it should also assist you in identifying the jury for the other defendant. The rule is that you must not have any contact with those other jurors, and the reason we have you each with your own separate color coding is so that you will know who the other jury is and you would not have any contact with them. And it's very important that you follow that instruction, and I'll go through a little more about other things that I've already mentioned to you during jury selection as to how you must conduct yourself during the course of the trial. That is, that you must not be exposed to anything outside of the courtroom that in any way could influence you in how you decide this case, that your decision must be made only on what happens in the courtroom. Let me ask, before I get further along, have any of you been exposed to anything about this case in any form, whether it be a conversation, overhearing something someone else said, seeing anything in the newspaper, on radio, television, anywhere? Have you been exposed to anything about this case since we last had you in court?
No.
All right, and please understand that that's going to be your obligation throughout the trial not to be exposed to anything. And periodically during the trial, I will ask you the same question. And even if I don't ask, if something happens where you happen to be exposed to something, if you would let me know by writing me a note so that we can discuss it. There will be continuing news coverage about this case throughout the trial, and there's also going to be a television camera in the courtroom that will focus on the witnesses and the lawyers during testimony. That camera is positioned in the corner there in the ceiling, and it won't focus on you. The rule is that the TV cameras cannot focus on or photograph the jurors, and that will be the rule throughout the trial, that is prohibited. Occasionally there'll be a still photographer from the newspapers in the courtroom, and likewise the rule is that the photographer is prohibited from photographing the jurors. The reason these cameras are in the courtroom is just so that the public has full access to the trial proceedings, but you are right here. You have more access than anybody else. You're seeing it as it's going on. And please follow my instruction not to look at or watch or listen to any of the news coverage as it occurs during the trial. You are here watching it in court, and you must make your decision based upon what happens in the courtroom. For those of you who have an interest in the newspaper coverage of the case, the court staff will cut out newspaper articles and create a scrapbook for you so that after the trial, if you have an interest in that, we would have collected that for you so that you could have that for your purposes. But at this point, the important thing is to remember that you must not look at any of that news coverage yourself during the course of the trial. The lawyers will be making opening statements to the jury. There are one or two matters I will be discussing with them before those opening statements. If things run true to form here, the opening statements will take about an hour and a half to complete. And then if there's still time this afternoon, then we'll start testimony after the opening statements. And then we'll have the other jury come down, and both juries will be present in the courtroom for the beginning of the actual testimony. One thing that will occur, as I've indicated, that throughout the trial there will be occasions when only one jury will be in the courtroom and the other jury will not. And when I hear of that or learn of that in advance, I'll certainly let you know of it. The purpose of opening statements, as they will be made to you here, is to give you an idea of what the evidence will be, what each side expects the evidence to be during the course of the trial. And as I've told you before, and as I will remind you throughout the trial, the statements of the lawyers, whether it's an opening statement, argument to the jury at the end of the case, or throughout the trial, none of their statements are evidence in this case, and you will not hear any evidence until after all of the opening statements have been completed and the first witness takes the witness stand. And your obligation is to keep an open mind on the case until all the evidence has been presented. All right, since it's just about noon, I'm going to excuse you until 1:30, at which time we will resume with these proceedings. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it. And if you would return to this courtroom at 1:30, at that time we'll start with the opening statements in this case. All right, have a good lunch hour, and we'll see you at 1:30. And if counsel would remain, there's a matter I want to discuss with you. Looking for that relates to the subject of discussion relating to Oziel.
Yes, Your Honor, we received it just as the court took the bench, so that we had looked at it.
All right.
Had a chance to look at it.
Well, do you need that before you make your in-camera presentation?
Yes.
How long would it take you to look at that material? All right, then, if you can be back here, and you indicated your in-camera hearing would take just a couple minutes. All right, then be back promptly at 1:30, and we'll do that, and then I'll roll, and then we'll have the opening statements. All right, we'll be in recess. And all the jurors are present, and we'll now proceed with opening statements, first from the prosecution, and then the defense. Mr. Kuriyama first.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't think we have everybody in the same order they were this morning. You sort of moved and changed around. Is this the way you feel that you should be now in the jury box? Seat number 1. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's right.
That's not in the right order, Your Honor.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why don't you take your seats in the way you're supposed to be here so that helps us a little bit. No, we're still not right. Oh, hold on a second. Okay, yeah, okay, we're okay. All right, let's proceed then.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show in this case that Erik and Lyle Menendez conspired to murder their parents, Jose and Mary Menendez. They planned what Erik Menendez called the perfect murder. Pursuant to the plan, the defendants drove down to San Diego on August 18th, 1989, and bought 2 Mossberg 12-gauge shotguns from a Big 5 sporting goods store using false identification. They committed the killings on a Sunday night, a night when the maid, the Menendez household maid, was not there. The defendants had a ready alibi when questioned by police. Erik Menendez told the police that he and his brother went to see Batman in Century City, and that they then went to Santa Monica to the Taste of LA. It was some kind of a wine tasting function. According to Erik Menendez, they just happened to come back home to pick up some false ID, some fake ID for a night on the town when they came upon the brutal slaying of their parents. The defendants were the ones to call 911 and report the killings initially to the police. The investigation into the murders of Mary and Jose Menendez was thus begun. The investigation revealed that Jose Menendez suffered a shotgun wound to the back of his head, as well as 4 other shotgun wounds. Mary Menendez suffered 10 shotgun wounds, including a contact wound to her left cheek. 2 shotgun blasts shattered panes in the French doors in the family room where the victims were killed. On August 24th, 1989, 4 days after the killings, Erik and Lyle Menendez went to Slavic Jewelers in Beverly Hills and purchased Rolex watches and money clips for some $15,000. The defendants thereafter collected $200,000 each on September 8th, 1989, and another $125,000 each on September 15th, 1989, in insurance proceeds from their father's life insurance policy. In addition to the defendant's alibi, the evidence will show that Erik Menendez tried to pin the crimes on others. On November 29th, 1989, over 2 months after the slayings, and with the investigation ongoing, Erik Menendez claimed that hitmen were responsible for the murders. He also claimed that Castro might be involved in the murders because his father, Jose Menendez, wanted to liberate Cuba. Defendant Erik Menendez was secretly taped in a conversation that he had with Craig Signorelli at Gladstone's restaurant in Malibu over dinner on November 29, 1989. The defendant is heard to say, "I've known from the beginning. No clues, no one heard anything." The defendant then states his belief that Castro might have been involved in the killing of his parents. The defendant then says, "Man, we're talking about special hitmen, special shotguns, and knew exactly what they were doing in and out of the house. No one saw anything, no one heard anything. We're talking about serious hitmen." The evidence will show that the defendants nearly got away with their crimes. They had meticulously picked up all the shotgun shells from the family room. They had buried the shotguns, and they had indeed an alibi. With the investigation nearing 7 months in duration, the Beverly Hills Police Department finally received a break in the case, information which led to a search warrant on the home and office of Beverly Hills psychologist Jerome Oziel and the seizing of evidence implicating the defendants. With information relating to this evidence, Lyle Menendez was arrested on March 8, 1990, and defendant Erik Menendez was arrested on March 11, 1990 for the murders of Jose and Mary Menendez. Dr. Oziel will testify then on Halloween, October 31st, 1989, the defendant, Erik Menendez, said that he was having vivid dreams of his parents being murdered. He told Dr. Oziel, "We did it." Dr. Oziel asked him if he meant that he and Lyle had murdered his parents. Erik Menendez responded yes. Erik Menendez then said that his father was too controlling. He criticized them. He made them feel inadequate and prevented them from doing what they wanted to do. He said that he and his brother discussed killing their father and getting him out of their lives. They couldn't see any freedom with their father around. Together, they decided to kill him. Pursuant to this conspiracy, the defendants drove all the way to San Diego and purchased 2 Mossberg shotguns with false identification 2 days before they would actually do the murders. Erik Menendez said that his mother had to be killed also because she would have been a witness and would have been miserable and suicidal without their father anyway. Erik Menendez told Dr. Oziel that he and Lyle surprised their parents walking into the room with their pump shotguns. Erik Menendez said his father cried out, "No, no, no." The brothers then began to blast away. After they had emptied their shotguns into their mother and father, their father was dead. But Erik said their mother, who ultimately sustained 10 shotgun wounds, was moaning on the floor and trying to crawl away. According to Erik Menendez, the brothers went back out to the car and reloaded, and Lyle then returned to finish off their mother. Erik Menendez said that they picked up the shotgun cartridge casings, removed their blood-spattered clothes, and placed their clothes into a bag. They put fresh clothes on and drove to a garbage dumpster where they threw away the bloody clothes and took their shotguns and buried them down an embankment off of Mulholland Drive. They then went to a wine tasting party to meet with Perry Berman. Mr. Berman was not there, so they arranged to meet him later that night. The defendants then returned to their house and called 911 as if they had just come upon the murder scene. The defendant, Erik Menendez, said that his father had recently nearly disinherited him, and he told Dr. Ozio that that was another reason to get rid of his father. Erik Menendez said that there was no way to link them to the crime, since the fingerprints were their fingerprints, since they lived at the house, and there were no witnesses. No one could link them to the weapons, he felt. The weapons were not recovered by the police. He believed there was no way to tie them to buying the shotguns in San Diego. There was no way to link them to the murders in his mind. Erik Menendez said that they felt that they could never equal their father's accomplishments. Erik Menendez was pleased, however, at having pulled off the murders without being caught. The defendants said that they killed their father out of a desire to be free of his control, criticism, and impossible standards. Dr. Ozio, when he asked them why they killed their mother also, the defendant, Erik Menendez, said he discussed with his brother the fact that their mother did not deserve to die, but their plan was perfect, and they did not want to change the plan. The evidence will show that in January of 1988, Erik Menendez was involved in writing a screenplay in which the hero is...
Objection, Your Honor.
All right, the objection is sustained at this point on that issue. Move on to something else, Mr. Freeland.
Your Honor, there has been a previous ruling on this.
There is not.
The evidence will show that the defendant, Erik Menendez, went to great lengths to cover up his crime, including lying to the police and blaming professional hitmen for what he and his brother had done. Erik Menendez bragged about committing the perfect murder, and he almost got away with it. The evidence will show...
Argumentative.
The evidence will show that Erik Menendez is guilty of premeditated and deliberate murders, the premeditated and deliberate murders of Mary and Jose Menendez.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kuriyama. Ms. Abramson for the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. This is large, but the print is very big, so it isn't going to take as long as it looks. This is opening statement, and as the court has indicated, this is supposed to be an outline of the evidence that we intend to prove both through live witnesses, through exhibits, through analysis of evidence. If this were a closing argument, you would properly expect me to start refuting what my opponent, Mr. Kuriyama, has just said. But this is not closing. This is opening. And the purpose of opening statement by the defense is to let you know what evidence we will be producing when our turn comes to put on our case. By telling you now what we intend to prove later, it is our hope and it is our expectation that you will do what you have promised to do during the jury selection process. You will keep an open mind. You will wait to hear both sides of the case. And
Objection, Your Honor. This is argumentative.
Yeah, let's just get to what you expect the evidence to be.
Well, I will, Your Honor. Mr. Kuriyama just told you that you will find his evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt of first-degree murder. It is for you to wait until you have heard all the evidence for you to decide what is the truth.
Objection, Your Honor. This is argumentative.
All right, I think you're just about to finish what you were going to say.
Yes,
Ms.
Your Honor, I'm
Abramson.
refuting what Mr. Kuriyama just said.
All right, without arguing with Mr. Kuriyama and without arguing with anybody, you can finish your
Thank you, Your Honor.
your remarks.
And decide whether the presumption of innocence has been overcome by proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Erik Menendez is guilty of what he is charged with here, first-degree murder. At the end of the case, the judge will tell you what the law is that applies to this case, and he will instruct you on theories. Your job will first be to decide what are the true facts and how do they apply to the law as the judge gives it to you. Erik Menendez has entered a plea of not guilty to what he is charged with, first-degree murder with special circumstance. But as you may have learned during the jury...
Your Honor, I believe this is argumentative. She's going to give an opening statement. I think it...
Okay,
Your Honor, can
Mr.
we-
Kuriyama, let's not argue and sit down, and you can be seated, Mr. Kuriyama. And Ms. Abramson, you are going afield here. Let's go to what you expect the evidence to be rather than how it relates to the legal theories.
I wasn't going to relate it to the legal theories.
Okay, well,
I
you're
was
going
merely
beyond
gonna-
what you anticipate here. Let's go on to the evidence.
All right. It will be your job to decide what kind of killing this is. That depends on what you come to believe was the reason for the act. The only question in this case is why did these killings occur? There is no issue as to who killed Jose and Mary Louise Menendez. Why they were killed is what the focus of all of our evidence will be on. We intend to provide you with the answer to that question. The following recitation of facts is a summary of what many, many witnesses, including Erik Menendez himself, will testify to. On Sunday, August 20th, 1989, Erik Menendez, 18 years old, along with his 21-year-old brother, Lyle Menendez, shot and killed their parents in their home on Elm Drive in Beverly Hills at approximately 10 p.m. They shot their parents with 2 shotguns they had bought in a store in San Diego 2 days before, on Friday, August 18th. At the time of the purchase, for which Erik Menendez signed the paperwork, they used the driver's license of a young man named Donovan Goudreau, who was a former friend of Lyle Menendez. Erik Menendez had carried Donovan Goudreau's driver's license for some time, both because he had lost his own license and because the Goudreau license, Donovan Goudreau being 21, allowed Erik Menendez entry into places that he otherwise would be barred from as underage. Having fired 2 shotguns in the middle of a residential neighborhood on a quiet night, Erik and Lyle Menendez expected an immediate police response. They waited. When no one came, they decided to leave and pretend that they had not been home at the time of the shooting. For the next hour, they engaged in a frantic and feeble effort to construct an alibi. They went to a nearby movie complex in the hopes of obtaining tickets for a showing in progress. They discarded the guns and the used shotgun shells. Erik discarded some clothing he had worn during the shooting. And they attempted to meet up with a friend in Santa Monica. Although they called the friend who was then at home and arranged a further meeting, Erik Menendez was by this time incapable of functioning. He was falling apart. Therefore, they went home, and Lyle called the police. When the police arrived, they observed that Erik Menendez was obviously, visibly, dramatically hysterical. The prosecution will claim he was faking. Experienced police officers, his tennis coach who knew him and who came to the scene, saw that he was not faking. He was, as one of the officers will testify, traumatized. Later that early morning, he was interviewed by the police, and he lied to them. He was 18 years old. He had had a lifetime of abuse. He was in a state of shock, and he did not want to go to jail. Over the next weeks and months, Erik Menendez was torn by guilt, by remorse, by horror over what he had done. and his distress was visible to many witnesses. His family in New Jersey sent him to see a doctor. He had lost a tremendous amount of weight. He was suffering constant nightmares. He was repeatedly reliving the killings in the way that some Vietnam War veterans relive their experiences. The proof of this was that he told the police months later that he could still smell the smoke. Although he had done the act, he was traumatized by it and could not live with his guilty conscience. Now, you will hear expert testimony that this is not the post-crime mental state of a cold-blooded, calculating killer. This is the condition that a decent person, however imperfect, having been driven to do a violent act, regretting that violent act, finds himself in. As further proof of his lack of calculation, he confessed his involvement in his parents' killing within weeks. His first confession, in a rather tentative way, was to Craig Signorelli, who will be a witness for the prosecution in this case. Later, finding himself closer and closer to suicide, he confessed to L. Jerome Oziel. He did not tell either Craig Signorelli nor L. Jerome Oziel the whole story, for many reasons which will be explained to you, but not the least being a lack of trust in either of them. He did not tell them the true motivation for the killings. To do that, he would have had to reveal the shameful, in his opinion, secrets that he had spent most of his life concealing. But what he could not and did not do with them, he will do with you. He will tell you why he killed his parents. He will tell you the entire painful and difficult and complicated story of his life. On March 8, 1990, Lyle Menendez was arrested in Beverly Hills. Erik Menendez was in Israel on a professional tennis tour. When he learned of his brother's arrest, and knew, of course, that the Beverly Hills police wanted to arrest him as well, he voluntarily got on an airplane, flew to London, from London to Florida, from Florida, Los Angeles. He was not in police custody. He came back voluntarily. He surrendered to Detective Zoller, knowing that by doing so, he was facing the gas chamber. Many witnesses will contribute their observations of Erik Menendez and his family over the years to present as complete a picture as possible of the treatment he and his brother received at the hands of their parents. Because the origin of this killing was a lifetime of abuse at the hands of those same parents. The characterizations of Jose and Mary Louise Menendez that follow as I recite the facts of that life to you are not my opinions. They are the impressions of people who knew them, of people who will testify about them to you. They are also the impressions, the evaluations, the profiling, if you will, of our expert witnesses in the field of battered children and battering parents. Our witnesses, who are family members, teachers, coaches, friends of the parents, friends of the sons, business associates of Jose Menendez, therapists who treated Mary Louise Menendez, and Erik Menendez himself, will paint a portrait of Jose and Mary Louise Menendez as parents that will make understandable to you how they could have died at the hands of their children, what they did to their children to bring this about. Our expert witnesses, we believe, are among the most highly credentialed professionals in the areas of research into child abuse and the evaluation and treatment of abused children. These are people, some of whom have never testified for the defense in a case before. They have been prosecution witnesses most of their careers. They will tell you what the effects of maltreatment are on a child, how these effects continue into adolescence and early adulthood, and most importantly, how the child shaped by abuse can be expected to react to threatening situations emanating from the abusers. They will try to teach you something that many of you may know a good deal about already, and that many of you will have only had a passing reference to. And that is what happens to the personality structure and the character structure of a child who does not get those basic things that we all know children need. And they will tell you how much worse the damage is when those children receive harmful and traumatic experiences at the hands of the people who are supposed to be nice. They will tell you how the personalities and perceptions of abused children fall into predictable patterns. How over the past 10 to 15 years, our awakening awareness and concern for the welfare of children has resulted in a large body of research in which profiles of abusive parents and of abused children have emerged. And most important, they will share with you their exhaustive evaluations of Erik Menendez. Each evaluation conducted for over more than 40 hours of interviewing with him. One of the experts has spent more than 200 hours with him. And their opinions that he indeed is a young man who suffered extreme forms of lifelong sexual, emotional, and physical abuse at the hands of both of his parents. Their opinions are not just based on their interviews with and their impressions of Erik Menendez alone. They are also supported by an extensive battery of objective psychological testing that was administered to Erik Menendez by a highly experienced forensic psychologist. The experts also examined all of Erik Menendez's school records and medical records. They read thousands of pages of witness interviews and interviewed witnesses who will be testifying here. And they examined the crime scene evidence, the same evidence that will be presented to you in this case by the prosecution. So what was it then that was done to Erik Menendez, and how do these events lead to homicide? The simple answer, which takes 28 pages to explain, and upon which we will expand in detail during trial, is this. For 12 years, between the ages of 6 and 18, my client, Erik Menendez, was sexually molested by his father. The pattern of molestation in which Jose Menendez engaged started out as inappropriate touching and arousal of his young son, and escalated in a carefully calculated pattern of grooming the child for his father's sexual gratification. This pattern included repeated acts of forcible oral copulation, sodomy, and rape and the intentional infliction of pain by the use of foreign objects upon Erik's person. Jose Menendez's obvious purpose was to use his child's body to satisfy his lust. But this sexual exploitation of his young son was also part of a more pervasive characteristic of Mr. Menendez: his absolute need to control and to manipulate the people around him. Many witnesses will tell you that this was a man who enjoyed to an extraordinary degree asserting his power over those weaker than himself, especially his boys. Some of the witnesses who will testify in this case and who will support this characterization of Jose Menendez loved him in life and love him now. He was physically strong, aggressive, intense, driven, and supremely arrogant. He was a man who has been described as knowing no boundaries. Many people, adults and children alike, saw the same intimidating characteristics in him that kept his children in constant fear of his displeasure. Many also saw his intelligence, some say brilliance, and the charm he could turn on and off at will, and were unsurprised by his children's obvious adulation of him. Witnesses will tell you that Mr. Jose Menendez thought himself a superior being and indoctrinated his children into believing that he was in all respects perfect, that their family was superior to other families, that their way of life was superior to others, that being rich was all that mattered, that people who were not successful according to his terms were sheep. And he indoctrinated his children in an effort to get them to share those views. What he did get was total obedience from his sons. As our experts will tell you, Mr. Menendez, as a perpetrator of incest, was true to his aggressive, competitive, and fundamentally violent nature. As you will learn, not all incestuous parents are violent towards their victims. Yet even the children of this so-called loving corruption feared death at the hands of their violators. This is because when a child is treated as an object of an adult's sexual desires, the child senses that he is not a person to that adult, just a thing. And instinctively the child knows that things get broken and destroyed. Here, though, young Erik Menendez had more vivid examples of his father's potential lethality towards him. This, after all, was a man, you will hear, who pulled Erik's hair when forcing this 11-year-old to orally copulate him, who slapped him repeatedly when the child cried after his father ejaculated into his mouth for the first time, who forcibly sodomized him after repeated prior attempts caused the child to cry out in pain. For this act, Jose Menendez waited until no one else was home, presumably because he knew it would cause excruciating pain and that the child would scream. This, too, was a man who, in Erik Menendez's early adolescence, decided that as part of an already pervasive system of hardening or toughening up his child by terrorizing him, by purposely placing him in frightening situations, by coaching him in sports by methods so brutal they resulted in the child passing out on the tennis court, nearly drowning in the swimming pool. This man decided to add the intentional infliction of pain to his sexual activities with the boy. His excuse was that his son had shown himself not a Menendez. He had shown himself to be a weakling, because when receiving a shot in a doctor's office, Jose Menendez's son had cried. Therefore, Dad was going to make his son impervious to pain. He used a variety of objects: needles, tacks, wooden implements, knotted ropes. These episodes are what Erik Menendez calls the dark days. He and the experts will tell you that these dark days taught him many lessons. How not to feel physical pain, how not to think about terrible things that are happening to you while they are happening, how to hate yourself and feel yourself a coward, and how to never trust an adult, especially one who is supposed to love and care for you. Now, I'm sure that you sense that acts of incest such as these are crimes. But unlike the alleged crime that the prosecution here presents, those crimes occurred in total secrecy. No police were called. No crime scene photographs were taken. No one took Erik Menendez's part as a child to vindicate his repeated victimization. Well, let me amend that. One such crime scene, the scene of forcible sodomy and oral copulation and assault by Jose Menendez on his son, was photographed by the Beverly Hills Police Department. And you will see those photographs of Erik Menendez's bedroom in the house on Elm Drive. For these crimes did not stop in the boy's early adolescence. The molestation continued right up until the week before the homicides, right there in that bedroom on Elm Drive. And as Erik wondered as a child, you may also wonder, what of that other adult who was to love and care for him? What of his mother? While these violations by Dad are occurring over the months and years of this boy's childhood. 3 days before she died, Mary Louise Menendez admitted to her son, the son that everyone says adored her, that she knew all along of his father's molesting him. For years, Erik Menendez had suspected and then refused to believe that his mother knew. He loved his mother. He wanted desperately for her to love him. And although the evidence of such feelings towards him on her part was very slim at best, he chose to believe, he needed to believe, that however much his father may have hated him, his mother must love him in her own way. He could not tell her himself what was going on for many reasons. In the early stages of Jose Menendez's seduction of his son, which our experts will tell you is a classic pattern among incestuous males, he told the child that this was their special secret, to be shared with no one. And this younger son, so unused to any affectionate treatment from his ever-critical father, who so often compared him unfavorably with his older, smarter, stronger, and more talented brother. This child, wanting his father's love, believed that these early sexual acts, which his father called massages and mouth massages, were affection. He would not risk losing that affection by disobeying Dad's command of secrecy. Later on, when it got ugly and violent, Erik Menendez felt that he was the one that had done something wrong. He blamed himself for what he perceived was a loss of Dad's affection and felt he had nothing to complain about. Moreover, as many people will testify, his mother seemed angry at him and his brother all the time. She had uncontrollable rages over seemingly meaningless things. She never comforted him when he was ill. Indeed, she never acknowledged that he was ill and punished him for staying home from school with physical complaints by locking him in a closet while she ran errands. She constantly criticized him for his poor schoolwork, calling him stupid and dummy, and forced him into that same closet to do his homework when she imagined him not working hard enough. But she acted like she was afraid of his father, and it was obvious that his father treated her with a great deal of disrespect, both inside their home and in front of other people. So in spite of her harshness towards him, Erik Menendez long believed that his mother was Dad's victim too. And he felt protective towards her. He didn't want to burden her with his problems. In thinking about telling her about the molestation, particularly when he was throwing up after an episode with Dad, or was in pain, or was bleeding, he thought if he went to her, it might break up the family, assuming she would believe him and not blame him and do something about it. And he had been told since he was tiny that this family was the center of the universe and was totally involved with his parents in every aspect of his life. But part of him was also afraid of finding out that she wouldn't care and wouldn't help if he told her. So he didn't. Did she know, though, as Erik Menendez says she admitted just before her death? You will have to decide. You will have to weigh the evidence. 12 years of sexual acts in her own home, often as frequently as twice a month. You will have to ask the question, why did she never enter her son's room when Jose Menendez was alone with him? Why did she never attend to her son when he was throwing up in the bathroom?
Objection, this is argument, Your Honor.
Objection sustained. Let's get back to
All right.
the
You
recitation
will-
of evidence rather than your comment on the evidence.
This is not my comment, Your Honor. You will
Okay,
hear
it's
testimony.
my observation that it is a comment, so let's go back to
I'll
what it is.
reframe it, Your Honor. You will hear evidence that she never attended to her son while he was throwing up in the bathroom next door to her bedroom after a sexual episode with the father. But she would come if Erik were throwing up due to illness and complain about the mess. You will hear evidence that she never asked Erik why he was crying after Dad left his room, but instead taught him to put water in his eyes to erase the signs of his tears. You will also hear evidence that up until the age of 15, Erik's mother would periodically make her son submit to her physical inspections of his genitals, which she called checking you out. Was she concealing sick and embarrassing secrets that her therapist in California believed were sexually related? Witnesses will describe Mary Louise Menendez as a woman obsessed with status and social position, the day-to-day enforcer of a pressure cooker training program for her boys. Contemporaries of these boys describe the Menendez home as boot camp. People describe Mary Louise Menendez as a cold and distant, some say hostile parent towards her children. But her most striking characteristic to all who knew her and all who will testify about her here is that she was an extremely secretive and private person. Now, no family, not even normal families, are perfect. Yet Mary Louise Menendez portrayed hers as such. She was closest to her sister-in-law, Terry Baralt, Jose Menendez's sister, yet she lied to Aunt Terry regularly. She claimed, for example, that the boys were superior students, yet her younger son was barely average. She concealed from the world that Erik Menendez had learning disabilities, had trouble with understanding oral instruction, and was dyslexic. She knew these things because the schools that he was enrolled in pointed these things out to her. She never gave him remedial treatment. In fact, the Princeton Day School, where Erik was enrolled for part of grammar school and junior high school, signed him up for a special after-school learning class for children with disabilities, and his mother made sure that he never attended. People will tell you that it was clear that her attitude was that her children, one of her sources of prestige and status, had to be perceived as perfect for her to be perceived as superior. So she sacrificed her son's need to learn to her need to be seen as a superior person like her husband. Aunt Terry Baralt, to whom Mary Louise Menendez spoke every day, knew nothing of her nephew's learning problems, knew nothing of any trouble in the family. But she knew of Mary Louise Menendez's competitiveness, of her desire to raise winners, of her theory that you ignored your child's fears in order to make him tough, of her being a mother who rarely, if ever, displayed affection towards her younger son once he passed out of babyhood. As you will hear from a number of witnesses, including Erik Menendez, it was his mother who made sure that he trained for and competed in all the competitive level athletics that she and Jose Menendez pushed the children into. Swimming at 3, soccer at 6, tennis at 11. And she was as driven and as critical of less than perfect performance as was their father. With a schedule that left him no time for studying, with learning disabilities that made schoolwork difficult, she still demanded that her son pull down high grades. It did not seem to matter if he learned anything. Grades were the only measure of success. And to succeed, as that was defined in this family, meant win, win, and win. Be number one at all costs. A relative will testify that Jose Menendez's credo for success was cheat, steal, lie, but win. And since winning was all that mattered to Mrs. Menendez as well, she encouraged her children to cheat if necessary to win, and participated in their cheating at school. She did much of their schoolwork herself, a fact that many of the teachers recognized. But those teachers will tell you that they were also intimidated by her and her husband, and although they knew there was trouble in that family, they never interfered. Jose and Mary Louise Menendez's efforts to isolate their children from the influence of any other adults was highly successful. Their son knew that no one ever stood up to them. He knew the power of his parents. He knew there were no adults who could rescue him. So for years he did the best he could, tried hard, won trophies for his parents, all the while struggling with thoughts of suicide and death and shame. Early in his adolescence, Erik Menendez's life improved slightly. His brother, who he idolized, became his friend. Jose Menendez had always compared Erik unfavorably to his older brother and had encouraged the boys to compete with and distrust each other. You will hear an expert's description of Jose Menendez's style of running his family as being classic divide and conquer. Make each member of the family think that his was the only approval worth gaining and that none had allies in each other. Lyle Menendez was a typical big brother. Sometimes he acted like a bully when Erik Menendez was small. But in early teenage, Erik's older brother started to defend him in small and subtle ways, the only ways Lyle Menendez dared in the face of his father's menace, defend him against the threat of Jose Menendez's physical and psychological attacks. Erik Menendez had always had few friends and fewer confidants, so his brother became, during that stage of his life and thereafter, the one person on earth it felt safe to love. 15-year-old Erik Menendez sustained himself with two thoughts. One, God may bring him a miracle, and the harshest part of his life, the sickening sex with Dad, might end somehow. And two, and more realistic, someday he would go off to college, and Dad wouldn't be able to come into his room anymore. God seemed to deliver on Erik Menendez's longed-for miracle when, during the summer of 1986, shortly after they had purchased a brand new house in Princeton, New Jersey, Jose Menendez announced to his startled family that he had taken a job in California. Erik Menendez could not wait to leave the scene of so many humiliations and pain. And indeed, during the first 6 months in California, it really appeared that his prayers had been answered, because inexplicably, there was no sex with Dad during that time. But then again, something else became very apparent in California. There was trouble between his parents, and Mom was falling apart. Erik overheard conversations in which he learned that his mother had discovered that for 8 years, Dad had been having an affair, and Mary Louise Menendez was consumed by her own shock and suffering. Lyle Menendez had stayed behind in New Jersey to go to school when the rest of the family moved to California. Therefore, Erik Menendez was left alone much of the time with a mother who secreted herself in her bedroom and cried for weeks on end. Eventually, she started therapy, which continued until she died. But she never got better. She never got over the affair. She never got close to dealing with all the other problems of her family. Something else was new about Mom in California. She relentlessly pressured her son to get a girlfriend. She set him a deadline. He had 6 months to comply. Now, Erik Menendez was 16 and he had had no experiences whatsoever with girls up until that time. He had always been very afraid that if he got close to a girl, she would somehow figure out what was going on with Dad. But he could not defy his mother, so he got a girlfriend. She was a very sweet, you may see her here, a sweet and innocent girl to whom he became obsessively devoted. But at the same time, he was full of doubts about himself as a male. He still believed, even at 16, that the sex with Dad was somehow, at least partially, his fault. He must have done something to bring this on himself. There must be something about him that would make his father treat him that way. He was half convinced that he was homosexual. He feared that people knew or could tell that he was different. Erik Menendez's friends from the last 3 years before the homicides will testify to what he was like then. As a high school tennis star, he was admired. He made friends with the other tennis players. He was inventive and interesting and fun. But he was also unusually anxious. He seemed preoccupied with a million things on his mind. His tutors described him as someone who would suddenly space out in the middle of a lesson and they couldn't get him back. And he was hidden. He was secretive. And friends will say that they noticed that he lied to his parents about totally insignificant things. Now, these teenagers, or former teenagers, will say they lied to their parents too, but usually when they did something wrong. Erik was lying to his parents about every single detail of his life. Our experts will explain to you that when you take a child whose entire life has been structured around secrets and the concealing of secrets, keeping secrets becomes a high priority. And when that child has had parents that have intruded into every aspect of his life, in fact, for the last year before the homicides, Jose and Mary Louise Menendez were tapping Erik's phone, something he did not know until they died, and he found the tapes, and with the help of one of the security guards at the Elm Drive house, he found the recording device. Well, those experts will tell you that a child who is in adolescence needs some sense of separation, some sense of privacy, some illusion of control over his life. And lying to the intruders is the most minimal but somewhat effective way of creating some sense of freedom. Erik had some very strange ideas about his parents because of their behavior and their strangeness over the years. And during that period just before the homicides, he will tell you that he genuinely believed that his mother had supernatural powers. First of all, because she often acted very strangely. And second of all, because she knew all these things that he was purposely concealing from her. Now later, of course, he learned she was tapping the phone, but at that time, he hadn't a clue. And so she seemed a very powerful and a very frightening person. In the spring of 1989, you will hear testimony that Jose Menendez was greatly displeased by his younger son. In his opinion, Erik Menendez was being rebellious. The boy was actually refusing to report to his father the hourly details of his tennis practice. And he was refusing to tell his father exactly what aspect of his tennis game he worked on during each structured hour of practice. Now, this may seem absurd to us, but this was one of the many minute demands that Jose Menendez made on Erik Menendez. And it was a radical departure for Erik at 18 to not be telling his father the minute-to-minute details of his sports involvement. There was no question that Erik was training every single day and training hard, because over the coming summer he was going to compete in the Junior National Tennis Championships. And he was higher ranked than in any previous year, so he had a good chance of winning, and the parental pressure was on him in a major way. He was also planning on attending UCLA in the fall, and was expected to make the UCLA tennis team, which he had to compete for, and which was one of the best in the country. So he was devoted to tennis that spring, totally focused. But as a consequence of that focus, and as a consequence of the parental pressure that sports and winning was more important than school, he was cutting a lot of classes in order to maintain his tennis training, and his grades were suffering. By this time, Erik will tell you that sex was used by his father mainly as a form of punishment. There was no longer any propaganda that it was normal, what the Roman soldiers did, the lies that Jose Menendez used to seduce his son when he was younger. It was clear to Erik that now the sex was a show of force and dominance and nothing else. And Erik Menendez hated himself for not being strong enough to stop it. In May of 1989, Jose Menendez sodomized his son for the last time in a rage over the boy's silence about his tennis training and his anticipated failing grade in chemistry. Erik Menendez's only consolation, the thing that sustained him, that had sustained him for years, he will tell you, was that he would escape to the dorm at UCLA in September, and this degrading chapter in his life would finally end. During July and August of 1989, Erik Menendez traveled with his parents to the three venues, the three different cities, where the tennis championships were conducted. He played hard, and he did rather well, but not good enough for his father. When he lost the last match he played, his father's fury was worse than anything Erik had ever experienced in the past. Returning to California on August 9th, Erik Menendez was determined to endure as best he could until school started. A week before the homicides, Jose Menendez once again displayed his intention to continue his domination over his son. He announced to his son that although he would ostensibly live at the dorm at UCLA, he would be required to sleep at home several days a week so that his parents could monitor his schoolwork. Erik Menendez understood immediately what this meant. The sex was going to continue. And all of the hope that he had sustained himself on all of the years, the method by which he pushed away thoughts of suicide, vanished. Following this announcement, Erik Menendez packed some clothes, planning to leave the house for a few days. He couldn't bear to be around his father in the state of despair that he now was in. His mother and his father stopped him and said what they had said before when he had made efforts to run away, that they would always find him, that there was no escaping them, and that he could never survive on his own. His father also told him that he would deal with him more fully when he returned from a business trip he was taking that week. On Tuesday, August 15th, Jose Menendez left on his trip. Later that day, Erik Menendez observed an argument between his mother and his brother. In the course of the argument, Mrs. Menendez ripped the hairpiece off her older son's head. Until that point, Erik Menendez didn't even know that his brother had lost much of his hair and wore a hairpiece. It suddenly became clear to Erik that everyone in this family keeps secrets. With Lyle Menendez's secret revealed, Erik did what for years he had been warned against doing. He told his brother what his father had been doing to him. And he will describe to you the details of that fateful conversation. Because what it led to was a determination on Lyle Menendez's part to come to the aid of his baby brother. The form of that aid was to be a confrontation with their father, in which Lyle Menendez was going to insist that Jose Menendez stop molesting his son and allow the brothers to leave the home and live together. Erik Menendez will tell you that this decision led to days of intense tension and dread on his part. He was terrified of what his father would do once he learned that he, Erik, had revealed the secret. But he had such confidence in his big brother, and he wanted so much to believe that his big brother could help him, that he also had tiny moments of hope over those days. Maybe it would work. Maybe he could get away. On Thursday night, Jose Menendez returned from his trip and met with his older son. The meeting was a disaster. Jose Menendez was defiant. "He is my son, and I will do what I want with him," Lyle Menendez later reported to his brother. And then let me say something about this. Our experts will testify about their experiences, which are extensive, not just with abused children, but with abusing parents. And what may sound very peculiar to us now, they will tell you is not unusual. That although most molesters deny it, when they admit it, they justify their behavior. They seem to believe they have the right, or they have the power, or the child didn't mind, or he really must have liked it. They have their own sick ways of rationalizing it. And you will hear from our experts that given Jose Menendez's entire personality and character structure, this outrageous statement fit his pattern. But worse than this outrageous statement was Jose Menendez's reaction to Lyle's threat, improvidently made, to go public with the secret if Jose didn't stop. Erik Menendez experienced his father's reaction to his brother's threat firsthand through a series of violent and hysterical confrontations between first himself and his father and then his mother. The upshot was that his father again threatened to kill him as he had in the past, and his mother, acknowledging her complicity in the molestation all along, blamed her sons for what she perceived to be her greater victimization. "I hate you, I hate you. I wish you had never been born," she said. And it was not the first time she had said that to her boys. The next day, which was Friday, convinced that their parents were going to kill them, rather than allow them to go public with the facts of the molestation, Erik and Lyle Menendez purchased the shotguns for their own protection. They had intended to buy handguns, which would seem to be a more useful weapon for self-defense since it wasn't so obvious, but found out, being amateurs in the firearm game, found out that you could not buy handguns on demand. You'd have to wait 2 weeks. And their fear was such, they didn't think they would be alive in 2 days, let alone 2 weeks. Erik Menendez will describe for you what the next 2 days were like. The increasing terror, the recurrent nightmares, the lack of sleep, but most importantly, and in great detail, he will describe the ominous words and actions of both parents that convinced him that their plan to eliminate their sons was in place. And on Sunday night, it appeared to him that the trap was sprung. By words and deeds, he perceived that his father and mother were about to kill him. And he reacted with pure terror, pure panic. He fired every round in his gun at them. He believed them incapable of dying. Our expert witnesses, one of whom works with the FBI on the analysis of crime scene evidence and the profiling of sociopathic killers, will describe this crime scene as a classic example of the overkill one sees when frightened and powerless people kill those they fear and perceive as all-powerful. The crime scene of abused children who kill their abusers out of fear. Mr. Kuriyama has talked to you about perfect crime. That information comes from L. Jerome Oziel. It will be for you as a jury to decide whether anything about this crime was perfect at all. I am mindful of the fact, however, that the prosecution is relying very heavily in this case on the testimony of L. Jerome Oziel.
Argumentative, Your Honor.
Again, seated, Mr. Kuriyama. Let's get to the recitation of what evidence you expect,
I will, Your Honor.
rather
Just
than
introduce
who
it.
is relying on what or what you're relying on or anything of that nature, just whatever you expect the evidence to be in the case.
Okay. Dr. Oziel, as the prosecution refers to him, to support their theory of why these killings occurred. You are the judges of the credibility of all of the witnesses, and what this means is that the source of any piece of information is as important as the information itself. We will challenge through evidence in this case the accuracy of the information given to you by L. Jerome Oziel in this trial. He was not present when these events occurred, so he can know no more than what he was told. And he was not told the truth about why these killings took place. He can, however, like any other witness, say more than he knows, because like any other witness, he can lie. And we will challenge the truthfulness of L. Jerome Oziel in this trial. We will present evidence to you to prove that this man operates on his own agenda, that he has motives to lie about what he was told by the Menendez brothers, and that he has a track record of lying, manipulating, and controlling people for his own selfish purposes. There are many witnesses who will testify in this trial who bear the title doctor. You will have to weigh their qualifications. Most important, you will have to judge their honesty. Our evidence will show that only one doctor who testifies in this trial has a motive to lie to you. To sum up, then, what we intend to prove. Erik Menendez was the abused son of wealthy parents. He killed his parents because he could no longer endure their abuse and had to stop it. When he did that, he unwittingly made himself a threat to everything his parents valued. He put himself in mortal danger. When he sensed that danger was imminent, his instinct to survive took over. Because his parents were wealthy, the prosecution tells you he did it for the money. What do they say when poor kids kill?
Counsel, now you're arguing again.
I'm done, Your Honor.
All right, and the comment of counsel, ladies and gentlemen, is not evidence in this case. As I've indicated to you, the evidence will start fairly soon this afternoon when we hear the first witness take the witness stand. And I'll remind you, you must keep an open mind on this case until you've heard all of the evidence. And we'll take a recess at this point, and I'd ask that you, just for the logistics of it, go back into the jury room, and we'll resume in 20 minutes at 10 after 3. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it, and we'll resume at 10 minutes after 3. Yes, we'll do that in just a moment. The jury has left, and Mr. Kuriyama, you wanted to put something on record.
Yes, Your Honor. With respect to the pretrial motions on the screenplay evidence, the court had ruled previously that the first 2 pages of the initial screenplay were admissible.
No, that ruling was deferred until we heard from Signorelli as to how that was written. And there was a ruling that the second screenplay was not admissible because it had all sorts of extraneous matter in it. And we would hear from Mr. Signorelli regarding the first screenplay as to how it was prepared before the court made a final decision on that. And since he was not available, we had to wait until his testimony or a hearing outside the presence of the jury regarding that. All right, the court will take a recess, but before we do that, there is a matter regarding photographs that counsel has presented to the court, and the prosecution indicated that you intended to use one photograph today.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, and that is in relationship to which witness?
Officer Butkus.
All right, and that photograph has been presented to me, as well as all the other photographs of the crime scene and coroner photographs. And what is the objection by the defense to this photograph?
I haven't even seen it, Your Honor. I have to come around.
All right, you may approach the clerk and look at it. Did you wish to articulate your objection, Mr. Burt?
Well, I haven't heard enough of proof by the prosecution as to the relevancy of the photograph. I understand the general gist. police officer will describe what he observed when he entered the residence. So in light of that description, I think the probative value of that photograph is outweighed by an obviously prejudicial effect.
All right, well, it certainly seems to be a photograph depicting the crime scene. What is the position of the co-defendant?
Well, Your Honor, there are lots of other photographs depicting the crime scene that aren't as close and aren't as bloody. That photograph can't even purport to show wounds or injuries, and there's nothing about it that it does not show the entire layout of the crime scene. It doesn't give a complete picture of the room at all, or of all of the significant evidentiary areas of that room. It's just a particularly bloody photograph of the two bodies that illustrates no issue in contest in this case.
Well, there were other photographs that were presented to me, since all of them have been presented to me, which were of much more close proximity to the victims and show the wounds in even more detail than these photographs. This photograph, which appears to depict the two victims as they were left at the crime scene after they were shot multiple times by a shotgun, as you described in your opening statement to the jury. It seems to be the scene that was left after the shootings by your clients.
My point is, well, we don't contest that, Your Honor. The point is, how graphically and horribly do you have to actually show it? And my point is, there are other photographs that also show the victims in situ, where they were left, as the court puts it, that aren't as gruesome. And if the only purpose is to show where they were in the room, a shot from farther back shows that much better. So that doesn't really seem to be the purpose. It's not close enough to show wounds, and it's not far back enough to really give the perspective on the scene, particularly since it shows no relationship between the bodies and the doors and the entrances. So I have to assume its only purpose is to inflame, and I can assure the court that that's what it will do.
All right, what is the people's position as far as why you're offering this photograph?
Well, Your Honor, I think there's going to be a dispute as to precisely the nature of this crime. The defense is claiming self-defense. We're claiming a murder by means of lying in wait. I submitted a motion quite a while ago citing a plethora of Supreme Court opinions which say that these photographs are admissible to explain the testimony of the autopsy surgeon, to explain what happened, to explain malice, to explain all of the elements that the people need to prove in this case. We are trying to prove that this murder was perpetrated by lying in wait. The victims were taken unawares. The positioning of the bodies within the room indicates that. And it seems to me that out of all the photographs that we have, this photograph best sums up the crime scene that night. I'm also made aware of the fact that the defense has offered an expert and that there's going to be a dispute as to how many rounds were fired that night. And because of that, I think that we are going to have extensive testimony about the wounds and how the wounds could have been inflicted by 1 round versus 2 rounds. And so I think this is just the beginning of many photographs that are going to be necessary to prove the case.
Well, let me inquire, the photographs that you presented to me, are those all of the photographs of the crime scene, or are there others that...
Your Honor, there are many, many photographs of the crime scene. The ones that have been blown up are not the exhaustive group of photographs. There are others, but they're basically the same genre. Now, the court may notice that some of those photographs, especially one of Mrs. Menendez lying on her back, were particularly bloody and awful. But I'm not intending on using all of the photographs that the court has. I blew up some for the purpose of demonstrating that those photographs will not be used.
Your Honor, we have all the crime scene photographs here in 2 albums that we'd be happy to give the court so you can compare what they chose to blow up with what they didn't choose to blow up to see if there's any, and we have them in an easy viewing form.
All right, I'll be glad to look at those.
Can I
Yeah.
respond to the 2 points you made?
Certainly.
She indicated, Your Honor, there would be a dispute as to the number of shots fired. That's not true, because the prosecution has indicated that there is a ballistics report which we have yet not received, and the oral representation is that that ballistics report will be consistent with the information provided by our ballistics experts. So I don't think it's fair to say that there is necessarily at this point a dispute as to the number of shots that were fired. Second of all, she indicates that the photo illustrates her theory that these were murders committed by means of lying in wait. And I would represent to the court that we received another piece of discovery yesterday, which I alluded to, which indicates that the victim, Jose Menendez, was not in the position he's depicted in that photograph when the shots were fired. So for another reason, I think that photo should be excluded, because I think it's misleading given the discovery recently provided by the prosecution.
May I respond, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
The information I've given to the defense about the ballistics is that from the wadding recovered, not from the wounds inflicted, but from the wadding recovered at the scene, that only a certain number of shots can be verified. That does not mean that other means of verification are not available. I still think there's going to be a dispute. It's going to be the people's contention that the defendant's reloaded, and I think the defense is going to dispute that, and therefore the number of wounds is going to be of particular importance. Unless and until I hear that that is not in contention, we are going to have to talk at length about the wounds and how they were inflicted. In addition, the information which I gave to the defense yesterday from our serology expert was to the effect that the head of Mr. Menendez was in a slightly different position, slightly to his right, to have caused the pooling of blood, which the court can see next to him on the sofa. That is not a substantial difference, but it is a difference, and I think the defense is making more of it than it warrants. So for that reason, I think the cases are very clear that crime scene photographs and autopsy photographs are relevant to explain issues which are in dispute, and these issues are going to be in dispute.
Yes, for purposes of the record, could I just indicate what the report says that
Yes.
I referred to? It
Yes.
says, quote, Jose Menendez was not in the position in which he appears in the photographs at the time he received the shotgun wounds to the head, left leg, and left elbow. He was, however, either sitting on the west end of the couch, standing in front of the couch, or moving between a sitting and standing position. He was, for a time after receiving the shotgun wound to the head, sitting on the couch, leaning further forward and more to his right than is shown in the photographs. He was subsequently moved to his final position either by another person or by the shots fired into his right arm. That's what the report indicates to the court.
All right, I've reviewed this photograph. I reviewed all of the blown-up photographs that have been presented by the prosecution. I've also looked at the photo albums presented by the defense, and specifically those pages in the photo albums that deal with the crime scene. I didn't look at the photographs of the front of the house and the back of the house in as great detail as I looked at the photographs of the room where the shooting occurred. There were also coroner photographs included in the photo albums that were presented to me. And it seems to me that looking at the photographs of the room in which the shootings occurred, this photograph is an accurate depiction of that scene and is no more gory or bloody than other photographs that are in the same album and show the same scene. And it is an accurate depiction of the crime scene that is not unduly prejudicial, but depicts the crime scene as it was at the time the police arrived, and is under an analysis pursuant to Evidence Code Section 352 of the Evidence Code, the probative value of this, showing the relative position of the bodies at the time the police arrived, and circumstantially the position of the bodies shortly after the shootings. The probative value substantially outweighs any prejudicial effect, and therefore the court will permit this photograph to be admitted. All right, anything else before we take a recess? All right, and we'll resume at 3:10, and when we do, we're going to have the other jury come in, which means that the center section of the courtroom will have to be vacated so that the other jury can occupy that.
Which jury's going to be where, Judge?
We'll leave the jury that's in the jury room in the jury box, and the other jury in the center section.
Switch to that side.